Australia on Wednesday cancelled the scheduled Quad leaders meeting in Sydney next week, after US President Joe Biden cancelled his visit to Australia, according to a media report. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said the leaders of Australia, the US, India and Japan would instead meet at the G7 summit in Japan this weekend.
I'm cutting my trip short. I'm postponing the Australia portion of the trip and my stop.
US President Biden announced on Tuesday that he will postpone the Australia leg of his Asia trip, along with that of Papua New Guinea, given the uncertainty and intense negotiations with the opposition Republican Party to ensure that America does not default on its debt for the first time in history. The Quad leaders meeting will not be going ahead in Sydney next week, Albanese said in Tweed Heads, a town in New South Wales. Albanese says it's still possible that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will visit Sydney next week, ABC News reported. Because that has to be solved before the 1st of June, otherwise there are quite drastic consequences for the US economy, which will flow on to the global economy. He understandably has had to make that decision, Albanese said. The Prime Minister also said Biden was disappointed as he was unable to come to Australia and that the Quad leaders would instead try to gather on the margins of the G7 leaders meeting in Hiroshima. All four leaders, President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida, Prime Minister Modi and myself, will be at the G7, held in Hiroshima on Saturday and Sunday. We are attempting to get together over that period, and I'll have a bilateral discussion with President Biden, he said. At this stage, we haven't got a time locked in for that arrangement. Albanese said it was still possible that Prime Minister Modi and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida would visit Sydney next week, but officials in all three countries were still trying to confirm their plans. We are in discussions with the Quad leaders over today. We'll make further announcements about that, but Prime Minister Modi would certainly be a very welcome guest here next week, he said. But why America is going to default on its obligations as soon as June 1 if Congress doesn't address the debt limit before then, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said Monday. After reviewing recent federal tax receipts, our best estimate is that we will be unable to continue to satisfy all of the government's obligations by early June, and potentially as early as June 1, if Congress does not raise or suspend the debt limit before that time, Yellen wrote in a letter to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The accelerated timetable increases pressure on President Joe Biden and House Republican lawmakers to ramp up their debt ceiling discussions, after months of talks being at a standstill. Yellen warned that the actual date that Treasury exhausts its ability to pay the government's bills on time and in full could be a number of weeks later than these estimates. She noted that it's impossible to pinpoint an exact date since the amount of revenue the federal government collects and the amount it spends is variable. She will continue to update Congress as more information becomes available, but she reiterated that it's imperative that lawmakers act as soon as possible. We have learned from past debt limit impasses that waiting until the last minute to suspend or increase the debt limit can cause serious harm to business and consumer confidence, raise short-term borrowing costs for taxpayers, and negatively impact the credit rating of the United States, Yellen wrote.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the bill, as amended, is passed.